Good morning, welcome to Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. George DeJong on the Train Station Fitness Show. My guest in the studio, Dr. Kevin Light. We are discussing today something I've put on Facebook a couple of times. I also promoted it on the air, about sugar. Now, I know I've done sugar in the past myself with Dr. Webster. We have a different angle coming to you today, and then we'll also have some follow-up information. Dr. Light, share not the latest information, but the book that you just read and why it's so profound opposed to some of the books previous. What's the new information that got your attention to say, hey, this book is really something people need to know about?
Well, this book is called The Blood Sugar Solution. It's by Dr. Mark Hyman. He's a famous doctor. I think this book is close to or is #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And basically, it just takes this whole blood sugar diabetes thing from a new angle. Everybody's sick to death of, yeah, I know, sugar's bad for you, etc. It goes into detail that even if you're not grossly diabetic, even if you're not obese, this high sugar diet that this culture consumes is basically responsible for almost all chronic health problems. Diabetes, cancer, dementia, heart disease, strokes, they are all either indirectly or directly related to simple sugar consumption.
One thing that was shared with me yesterday, I was in a meeting with Dr. John Hachey, who will be on the show, I believe, next weekend, is they did some studies, and you may be aware of this, that there's no difference between ingesting sugar and its effect on the brain versus drugs, certain drugs. And what they did is they did these MRI scans of the brain, and they showed the brain how it reacted when someone ingested sugar, and then they showed the brain how it reacted when someone was on certain drugs. He didn't say which drugs they were. I didn't ask. That wasn't the focus of our meeting. And it was no different. It was exactly the same. So if you're trying to keep your kids off drugs and keep them safe and say, hey, that's not good for you, and be a role model, stay away from drugs. Well, why, Ma? If they know about sugar, why, Ma? Why, Dad, should I stay away from drugs? What's the difference between that and you eating that donut?
That's a good point. Unfortunately, sugar is culturally accepted. It's pervasive in our society. And the industrial advertising media just hammers us with this sugar message right and left. Everywhere you look in our schools, on our advertisements, you can't go anywhere without sugar slapping you in the face. And so it's okay. You get a cultural nod saying, well, sugar's somehow different. It's just good stuff. It's just fun and zesty. You bring up a good point that they found that sugar stimulates the brain pleasure and reward centers just like narcotics. Brain scans show it acts just like heroin. And they've also taken drugs, and they can block your desire for sugar. The same drugs that they use to block the response to heroin, it's just like narcotics and drugs.
Wow. All right, so Dr. Kevin Light is in the studio. He's the medical director at Texas Institute of Functional Medicines. You can give him a shout if you'd like, talk more about whatever it is, sugar or a boob lift or anything that he does. He's a board-certified general surgeon. 817-318-8251. We'll talk with him more coming up next. First, I want you to have some of this food for thought, so to speak. Daily consumption of sugar is killing you. At what rate? How does it show up in your daily life when you have sugar? We're talking about bread also, not just candies and cakes, but the response to certain foods that are sugar you may not be aware of. Where does the majority of the calories you consume from sugar come from? And did you know that the body is going to be addicted to certain sugared foods because they were designed to make them that way? By whom? How about by manufacturers? We'll talk more about the sugar addiction and how it plays a role on your everyday life. And it may not show up in disease today, but it will show up in the future. Dr. Kevin Light, George DeJong, 705 Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. 713 Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. George DeJong on the Train Station Fitness Show. My guest in the studio, Dr. Kevin Light. There's some big things going on in my life that many people are not aware of. There's some transformations, if you will. And you'll be aware of them here fairly soon, within the next couple of weeks. So I want to share some big news with you in my personal life. And no, it has nothing to do with the female yet. So, so there's all that. Anyway, we're talking today about a substance, an ingredient that affects everyone's life from the moment it touches your tongue and enzymes come into play from that moment until the end result. And Dr. Light read a new book he was sharing with us earlier. In addition to that, he saw something on Diane Sawyer, I guess it was last night, that you wanted to share?
Right. My wife and I were watching World News Tonight with Diane Sawyer, and she came out with this story about this big Coca-Cola advertising executive. And basically, he's sort of making amends to the public for years and years of manipulating people to be drinking what he considers a toxic product. And this guy was way up in the food chain. And it really made him feel unclean and dirty with the way they targeted. They targeted teenagers, Hispanics. They targeted schools. They targeted certain ethnic and financial type of demographics. To consume this drink, and he just wanted to let people know their dirty ways and how they go about it.
Do you think the company will now sue him for slander in any way?
Shoot, I don't know. I mean, you know, people sue right and left in this country anyway. Who can tell?
But it's amazing when you see the head of a company, somebody who's on their way up, they'll do just about anything to get there, and then once they're there and they've had the taste of the money and the power, and it's like, okay, now what?
It's just like tobacco.
All of a sudden you want to give back in some way, and you don't need to be there. What's the next level? There is no next level when you're that high up in his place, unless he starts another company. And it's good to hear and to validate what we know, whether you're a nutritionist all the way to a medical doctor to someone who is part of the marketing that is influencing people to buy certain products on a continual basis. You know, we know, and I did a show on this a long time ago with a teacher, that these big Coke or soda manufacturers, I don't want to say pick on Coke, but soda manufacturers pay schools to put their machines in the school. The school needs money. They see, hey, great, we'll take your soda machine and take your money as well. And I know some schools are trying to resist that, but once they get part of it, it's like, you know, how do you not continue to take this money that you need because they know they need funding? It's genius marketing.
You get them hooked early as children, and you have them as a product consumer for the rest of their lives.
So we know that sugar, some people know, that sugar is killing us. There's no gray area. Sugar is killing you. But at what rate does it do it? And I don't know if we really know that. It may be different for everybody who ingests it and how much you ingest and how often.
Well, sugar affects different people in different ways. That's why some people, for example, are prone to diabetes and others aren't. But the sugar is really killing us all. And the thing that we don't know, and that this book highlighted, is that it starts killing you at a relatively early age, because even if you're not obese, even if you don't have diabetes, these big spikes in sugar send your blood insulin skyrocketing, and insulin is the bad player in all of this. Insulin causes all the problems that leads to chronic disease, and they've found this over and over again. And for example, insulin causes inflammation. Inflammation, as you know from prior guests, is the mother of all disease. It causes the heart disease. It affects the way you think. It causes early dementia at a young age. It causes increased incidence of cancer. There's all kinds of problems that just the high insulin, you don't have to have diabetes, just the high insulin squishing around in your vessels starts to cause huge problems very early.
We need to qualify what sugar is, though. Will you go off on a tangent for a moment about what that is? We're not limiting it or narrowing it to cakes and candy.
No, sugar is anything that is considered highly glycemic. It's simple sugars we're concerned with, not complex sugars. For example, pasta, potatoes, rice, bread, even natural sweeteners, believe it or not, act just like sugar in many ways. And plain sugar, anything with flour in it is considered sugar. It goes immediately to sugar. It enters your body, and bam, it goes right to glucose, and your blood sugar spikes.
Now, we can play tennis with this all day long. I'll play the other side, where someone says, well, hold on. George and Kevin, you guys are crazy. We've had bread for thousands of years, and we've been fine. And then you can go back and say, yeah, but we've not lived as long as we're living. And I could say, you know what? We haven't had medication that keeps us living as long as we are, but doesn't mean we're healthy. And again, back and forth forever.
The easy answer to that is, throughout all of history, there's always been scarcity, okay? And our systems in our body to handle sugar have been designed around accumulating as many calories as you can, because there will always be famine, there will always be scarcity. Relatively recently in our history, now we have abundance, and now we have food everywhere. Our bodies are not designed for that. We are designed to collect as many calories as humanly possible. Now it's on every corner. That's the big difference.
I think it's important to sit with what you just said for a moment. We are designed to collect as many calories as possible. So that means you will just keep eating until you're full. Well, some people eat so fast, I'm one of these people, that I'll consume more calories in that 15-minute window before my mind tells me I'm full, right? Leptin levels and all that.
Right.
Versus someone else who eats slower, might eat fewer calories because they're chewing their food more time goes by, they're during social conversation when they're eating dinner, what have you. Right?
That's right, and the big bugaboo here is we drink all of our calories.
Did you just say bugaboo?
I said bugaboo.
Oh my God.
I'm sorry, it's what, 7:20 in the morning?
I don't care what time it is. You don't...
Okay,
I'm surprised you're married. Go
Anyway,
ahead.
I'm surprised she stays with me. Anyway, the big thing is we consume most of our calories in this day and age through liquid calories.
Yeah.
The problem with liquid calories, it's mainline right in your bloodstream. You consume it, bam, it goes right to your bloodstream, as opposed to eating a piece of fruit, for example, that has a lot of fiber, that's sort of slow-release carbs.
Well, hold on, Dr. Light. I have sodas that have no calories and no sugar in them, and they're good for me.
They're not good for you.
Come on now, how could you say that? No, the government would not let me ingest something that's not good for me. How can you say that if it says 0 calories and 0 sugar, it's a sugar substitute? Look, I saw on all these Good Morning shows and everything else where they had nutritionists and new dietitians on, actually not nutritionists, dietitians, where they say things like Splenda and all the sucralose and all those things aren't bad for you because all they are 2 sugar molecules put together. Come on.
Not true, not true. All the artificial sugars, you can't fool Mother Nature and get away with it. That's a big thing. These artificial sweeteners, they disrupt your normal hormonal and neurological signals that control your hunger, that control your satiety. You tend to actually eat more. Studies have shown that people who take artificial sweeteners, Splenda, etc., gain weight. It slows your metabolism down. It has a neurotoxic effect. All kinds of bad things with that stuff.
What was it, 13, maybe even 14 years ago? I've referred to this before, and I'll do it again for new listeners or to refresh your memory. I wrote my book, 3 Minutes to a Strong Mind and a Fit Body. It's free now when someone buys my cleanse because it's been so long ago.
I never got one.
You got one.
Oh, I must have lost it.
And, well, it's online. It's an ebook. Anyway, what I'm getting at is Dr. H.J. Roberts, who was the leading expert of aspartame poisoning, aspartame disease, shared the importance of staying away from this and how it can cause seizures, weight gain, crave more sugar, headaches, on and on and on and on. And he said and when it gets to a certain point where it's heated, if it's left out in the sun, when it hits your body, it turns into formaldehyde. How about that?
It's nasty stuff. You know, everybody
But it's safe for diabetics, Doc.
Everybody should Google aspartame. You Google aspartame, it'll blow you away.
But you know what? It'll blow you away today because of what we know. However, we are guinea pigs for so many years before we find out something's bad. Another, for instance, is margarine.
Perfect example.
Perfect example. It's chemicals. What is it? Where do you find margarine in nature? You don't. Anyway, that's like canola oil. Stands for Canadian Oil Company. Have you eaten a canola seed lately?
No.
Yeah. So let's move on with sugar. So we know that sugar and even if you have the 0 calories and the zero sugar, in my opinion, they're worse for you because it's chemicals.
Right.
They're not necessarily better because it has no sugar, no calories. So let's move past that. Sugar is a new epidemic of heart disease, cancer, obesity, Alzheimer's, dementia, diabetes, and so forth. But is there proof? If you had a medical doctor here today, one that is biased because that doctor works for a company that deals with sugar, let's say, okay, and that doctor were to ask you, Dr. Kevin Light, do you have proof that sugar can directly or indirectly affect someone in an adverse way that'll make them attract these diseases?
More proof than you could possibly even have time to read. There's proof everywhere in this day and age. This whole new field of functional medicine, age management medicine, preventive medicine, all this stuff is all based on evidence-based research, evidence-based. And if you look in the back of this book that we're referencing, Mark Hyman's Blood Sugar Solution.
How do you spell his last name?
Hyman.
Okay.
And it's in the New York Times bestseller list. The whole back section of the book is just littered and just full of references on each chapter. So there's references everywhere, and that's really not a problem substantiating this from a scientific point of view. It's the agendas that get in the way.
We'll come back with this, but there's something that you shared with me during the week that I want to share. You said people who are pre-diabetic are 4 times more likely to die of heart disease. The rate of stroke is 4 times higher in diabetics. Now, this is not going to be a diabetic show because we know that sugar affects everybody. What I also want you to do is share how sugar shows up in someone's life as far as symptoms are concerned. How can someone correlate the donut or the bread they just ate with how they're feeling 15 minutes, a half hour, an hour later, or several hours later? How does someone know that sugar is really adversely affecting them and not thinking that you're full of it just because you read some nice New York Times bestseller book and the website and what George DeJohn has said? We need to have some type of tangible evidence, if you will, okay? So we'll talk with Dr. Like more about how sugar affects us in our daily life and everything else you possibly can need to know. And if you don't find out everything you need to know on the show, you can call him. I'll give his information out later. It's 726 Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. 734 Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. For unbelievable deals to Napa's Big Tool Sale today, go to Napa on Freeport Parkway in Coppell. Stop in Coppell at Napa for big savings like 50% off select hand tools. The orphanage will be broadcasting live from 10 to noon today, and the Mexican national soccer team will be there on site for autographs and pictures. Guest in the studio, Dr. Kevin Light, integrative medicine, board-certified surgeon, who is one of the most well-read people I know, read a fantastic book, New York Times bestseller list, and you are already really knowledgeable about the effects of sugar on the body anyway.
Right.
But it was good to have this, I guess, come home, if you will, and to be validated and to be all put in one book. And to say, I knew that or I didn't know that, and wow, this is bigger than I thought. Then you saw something on Diane Sawyer reporting about the person who was the head of, was it Coke? Who was it?
He was a marketing executive that had the Coke account.
Had the Coke account.
Right.
And how he's feeling guilty now about how they targeted certain people because they know the detrimental effects of sugar. Let's not pick on certain soda companies or any soda.
Right.
We're just talking about sugar today and how it affects us. And leads up into what I left everybody with, this thought of, do you know when you ingest something, whether it be a donut, pasta, bread, cake, candy, or even soda, how it affects you immediately, 15 minutes later, hours later? Do you know, and can you correlate those feelings with sugar?
Well, you know, that's a really slippery slope question, because the big danger with sugar and the big danger with all these problems that you see is that these diseases take years to manifest, and so you don't really necessarily feel any fallout from taking sugar. You feel like, well, you know, what's the big deal? I feel great. I don't feel any harm. But there's a lot of little subtle things that people really aren't aware of. When people who are addicted to sugar, which is just about everybody, things they'll see include migraines, headaches, low libido. Men start getting man boobs because of the increased estrogen that's caused by the sugar.
Let's talk about the immediate effects. Here's what I can recognize. I mentioned this one time before. There was an autistic child who came into Starbucks, and I would see him about once a month or so, I don't know. And every single time he had his pastry from Starbucks, not picking on Starbucks because everybody sells all these foods, within less than 5 minutes. He was literally jumping up and down on the couches. And the nanny who brought them in was trying to get them to stop and couldn't figure it out. I look at this and I think, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure this out. How do you not correlate the food with this person's behavior almost immediately after, when it happens every time? And I'm sure it's not just when they go to a certain place to eat, it's anytime this person has this.
Right.
So it shows up in even someone who doesn't have these limitations as maybe excitability, anxiety,
irritability, hard time going to sleep, depression, anxiety. Anxiety is a big one. There's a lot of...
you finish having a meal and you've had, let's say, a sandwich. You think you're doing a good job because you put lettuce on it and tomatoes and all that other stuff, but you had a sandwich. You go back to work, you go to your cubicle, and all of a sudden you don't feel productive because you want to fall asleep at your desk.
Fatigue.
This is not the midday blues. It's not normal. It might be the norm, but it's not normal. It's not normal behavior. The body doesn't want to have that. And when you're eating properly, doesn't mean perfect. When you're eating properly and you're exercising, you have more sustained energy. Bob Sturm just finished the cleanse. Lost, 17 pounds, whatever it was. And he has fantastic energy, and he's sleeping incredibly well, and it's because he balanced his blood sugar. So when I say, how does someone correlate the food they just had with how they feel, I think, in my opinion, it's important to give people those immediate effects. What am I missing?
I think you have it all. Another big one immediately after consuming is people just aren't as, after they crash, when they're going up with the blood sugar, you tend to be a little excitable, but then you always have the crash when you, as you say, you fall asleep or you get a little lethargic. And along with that becomes mental dullness. Your mind just doesn't click along as well, and that's a real noticeable thing with that the results of the sugar high.
Now let's make this more relatable to people that are in the workforce, particularly salespeople. If you're a salesman or woman and you go on a prospecting call, you've got to have incredible mental acuity because you've got to be able to negotiate. Certain things you say may ink the deal or delete the deal. So if you don't have it and you're not on your game, forget about what you look like and how you feel when you're at your desk. But if you're not able to perform at your optimal level, you may want to think about changing what you eat before you go to that meeting. If it's not for the whole day, well then don't do it. But for that meeting. Now what have you eaten 2 hours before the meeting that will give you sustainable energy?
Right. I mean, I don't think that people who, in anticipation of a sporting event or of a function, I don't think that there's any correlation that they've shown increased mental abilities and acuities with a high blood sugar. I just don't think there's any correlation. I think people think that's the case.
Right.
I'll slam a Coke. That's probably more the caffeine than the sugar.
Oh well, some people don't even have Cokes. They have these 9-hour energies and all that. Forget, there's that, but we're not going to go forward with that because there's so much information we've got to move forward with. I left people with this thought, and you also, that pre-diabetics are 4 times more likely to have heart disease. Why?
Well, because the whole continuum is when you get pre-diabetes, it's sort of a gray area, and you have normal blood sugar, but you have these sky-high insulin levels, and it's the insulin. And finally, the cells, after you take Coke after Coke or whatever soft drink,
or sugar.
You have this high insulin level just sloshing around. Eventually, the cells just go, I'm not going to listen to you. Insulin, you're around all the time. I'm going to ignore you. So the insulin builds up. That's what's called insulin resistance. And this insulin resistance is the bad boy. It's the bad player. And that causes inflammation. Inflammation causes all that stuff. Causes vascular disease, heart disease, all these things we're talking about, stroke. That's the reason diabetics or anybody who's even pre-diabetic, whatever that means, everybody has different interpretations. They have a marked increase in all these diseases.
As they get older.
So
it's important that we slow it down for a moment. One of the things that you mentioned early in the show is, and I've mentioned as well in prior shows, is it may not show up today with how you're exercising or how you're eating. And what I mean by that is when someone who's 19 years old is performing an exercise that we know today is detrimental to your joints later on, and they can get away with it. They can get away with it now, but it'll show up later. If you're 19, again, we'll stick with the 19-year-old, and you're eating horribly All right, and all of a sudden, like you said, insulin builds up over time, and it's been there for a long time, and the cells finally say, you've done this to me so many times that you're crying wolf. I don't believe you anymore. You're just going to hang around. I'm shutting the door. You're not allowed in. Over time, now this is when you create all of this inflammation, and you are inevitably going to attract a disease, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so just so the listeners understand that what you're doing today may not affect you today or tomorrow in a disease form. However, your body, and I've said it 1,000 times, I'm going to do it again, I don't care if you don't like it, if you've heard it 1,000 times, your body speaks to you in symptoms. Sleepless nights, cravings, joint pain, so on and so on and so on. And if you don't listen to it, it'll speak louder. What is louder? Disease.
And here's a big symptom. It's obesity. You have all these big people that we see in the country now. And you know, the thing about fat cells secrete toxic materials. And people who are overweight, they've shown that these fat cells will secrete things that in and of themselves are inflammatory. Okay, so it's not just the insulin sloshing around, it's the fat cells secreting what are called cytokines. And cytokines wreak all kinds of havoc. And so when you're out of balance, you have these high levels of things just sloshing around in your blood, and that's all fat derived.
So processed foods, we know, have sugar. We know they have fat that may not be good fat. Maybe even there's some good fat in there. Let's give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Then they have salt. We know is it's not sea salt in most cases because it's a processed food. And they're combined in ways that the food industry makes them addictive. Talk about that, because I got some response about that during the week. People want to know how the food industry is purposely making the foods addictive.
Oh my God, they spend billions and billions and billions on this. They have, food industries will hire PhDs, and they've got time on their hands. These food engineers will sit in a lab and they'll tinker with just the right mix of sugar, the right mix of fat, whatever's going to sort of attract your monkey brain to where you cannot resist. And they have all, and they can test group after group after group until they have the perfect formula to where you just can't resist. And your reward centers in your brain, every time you consume this, light up like a candle. And so it's sort of an unfair advantage. These guys have tons of money, a lot of time, and they can test and test and test until they find something that is irresistible. And we are biologically designed to crave this stuff, and it's so easily addictive, just like heroin.
How do we know what you're saying is true? How did you find this information?
This is well documented in the food industry. This is well documented in reviews and in medical literature. This is well documented in marketing literature.
Okay, so now moving forward, actually we don't have time to move forward. So coming back, we'll talk more with Dr. Light about sugar. We'll wrap it up. We understand sugar is bad for us, and we have so much more we can talk about. We're not going to. How do we change it? How do we change our addiction to sugar? What do we do? I've talked about this before on the show. I don't think we can get it enough. So that's what we'll talk about. Dr. Kevin Light coming up next. 746, Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket. 754, Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket, George D. John, Train Station Fitness Show. Guest in the studio, Dr. Kevin Light. Let me give your place of business again. Dr. Kevin Light is the medical director of the Texas Institute of Functional Medicine's Aesthetic Surgery, Age Management Medicine. Phone number 817-313-8251. So we've discussed the detrimental effects of sugar. And by the way, I know this is like not going with the flow, but if you have missed this show and you'd like to watch it again, go to YouTube. I've got a new channel because the other one was deleted inadvertently by me. There's that. So put in 21-day body makeover com, C-O-M. 21-day body makeover com. Anyway, it'll be on YouTube loaded today. But we talked about sugar being detrimental for your health. Now, how do people stop craving it if they want to? There are a lot of people who have tried to stop, change things in their lives, and they feel physiologically that they cannot do it.
Right. You know, it's kind of like drugs. How do you stop taking drugs? How do you stop craving alcohol? And I don't recommend a 12-step program, but there's things you can do to really really help these cravings. First off, just say no. Well, that's easily said. You want to try to eat a real low glycemic or slow carb diet, which is a lot of vegetables, nuts, la da da. You've heard that time and time again. A real important thing that's really coming out is social networks. Who you hang with. If you hang out with obese people, you'll be obese. If your friends slam 20-ounce Cokes 3 times a day, you will too. So maybe just like alcoholics and drug addicts, you need to change your peer group, at least when it comes to eating. Another big thing is get out of the fast food rut. Start having dinner with your family. Start preparing your own food. Don't go for convenience. Go for good, wholesome nourishment, and I think that's a big factor in stopping this sort of cycle, this treadmill that you get on of consuming sugar.
I like the points. I like them. I've discussed it before. If you hang out with fat friends and you're already fat, you'll stay fat. You need a support group that has a different mindset. And it's not until you do that that you learn a different way of life.
Because you know, in and of yourself, left to your own devices, I mean, they got you.
Right.
You don't have any hope.
And then as far as eating dinner at home, you know, we're kind of in a bubble living in Dallas. And I'm not talking bad about Dallas. I love Dallas-Fort Worth. But there are so many people who don't cook that I'm aware of. The only thing we make are reservations. and it's important that we do that. But as far as nutrients are concerned, we know that magnesium is highly important and deficient in people who have a high sugar diet. Zinc, your B vitamins, and if you were to introduce these supplements properly, and we've talked about them on past shows, you can see them on YouTube or Facebook, you would find that it would be easier to cut your cravings for sugar.
That's absolutely correct.
Anything else you want to add real fast?
Vitamin D is also important, and so is the omega-3s. They're all reduced when you're on this sugar cycle.
Make sure if you do get an omega-3 oil that you get it where it's mercury-free, so get a high quality one.
Absolutely.
Okay? I like Carlson's, I like Nordic Naturals. Anyway, thank you for the show, and we've got my friends in the studio, particularly Craig Rosengarten, who just loves to beat me up.
What's up?
And the game begins. Look at Rick.
I'm just
happy to be here.
I'm just Sweden.
Are you used to that? Is that because of age?
I'm limp.
Is that because of age?
Whoa.
Too much sugar.
More zinc.
Hey, so I have a question about this sugar thing. So, hypothetically speaking, let's take a guy.
You can.
Let's just call him you.
Yeah.
No, it's not me. I'm just asking this question.
Who's this guy?
He's drinking 10 Cokes a day, sodas, for 20 years. And all of a sudden he hears your show, and he decides, I get it. I hear you guys, I get it. I got to get off this, and I got to stop. Can he reverse the effects of what the sugar has done to his body?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the beauty of it. It is reversible.
It is.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean
cool.
you stop. That's a good question, Craig. It doesn't mean you stop for a month and then you're healed.
And reversal isn't easy either. I mean, it takes a long time and a lot of work. And are you going to completely reverse it? Probably not, depending on when you catch it. But you can reverse a lot of it, depending on when you start.
It's better not do
How about
it.
the guy who's been drinking them for 20 years and says, you know what? I'm not overweight. I feel fine. I produce fine at work. Why should I stop? I don't have anything going on. And that's the person who needed to hear what I mentioned and Kevin mentioned earlier, that there's this buildup over time. And all of a sudden, bam, one day, you've got heart disease, cancer, or diabetes, or whatever.
Silent killer.
You're like, where'd this come from?
By the way, I'll show you this because it's kind of cool. That I wake up this morning and I look up USA Today. Can you see the front story on USA Today?
Health advocates go sour on sugar.
Wow.
And it's a 4-page article about all the different problems with sugar.
Interesting.
So,
Isn't it amazing? We've been mentioning this for so long, but everybody in here is smart enough to know that we've been guinea pigs and for many different products. Forget about health and fitness. Many different products. In my studies and some stuff that I'm doing, I've learned, I was sharing with Kevin, that in one case that I'm looking at, they have 680,000 metric tons of a certain chemical that comes into the United States every year from Asia. And the chemical, the only thing it does is help to soften and make flexible PVC. So, and I'm learning about this, again, through school stuff that I'm doing, right? So, and it makes me think, you know, I'm in this business that talks about toxins, how toxic we are. 680,000 metric tons every year in the United States of one chemical. The acronym for it is DINP. But I don't know how to pronounce the thing. It doesn't matter. That's one chemical of all the chemicals that are affecting us that I've mentioned before. I couldn't mention one particular one before unless I looked it up on the Gov site. It's getting scary, and I don't want to be that guy who's like, I know so much that I want to live in a friggin' bubble.
Right.
I want to live.
Yeah, it starts to get that way though, because I worry now every time I see you, and I'm working really hard on my health and my diet and everything. What am I going to bring in here that you're just going to shake your head at that I can't eat? And I'm very conscious of it too. It's like there's not much left.
No. You know, and I'm not going
to
to get into this, and it was mentioned a while ago, but tomatoes. Tomatoes today they're so produced so much. Did you know that they're produced with DNA of fish fish flounder? Yeah, that's the DNA that's in the. You know why? To make them more plump, so when they fall, they don't just
Huh.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be one of the healthier foods, I thought.
But not a tomato that's been genetically modified, whatever.
You know what?
Modified.
That works.
Thank you.
It's like anything. I think if you do anything with common sense, you'll be better off than not. I mean, if you want to be,
you don't know what common sense is sometimes. The culture,
Yeah.
certain cultures don't know common sense.
Okay, so you're saying that these tomatoes now have DNA of flounder or whatever?
Yeah, so
Unless you eat barrels of these tomatoes, so what?
And you're getting omega-3 when you're eating your tomato now.
I think
Yeah.
I think the concern. This is where you kind of know a little bit more than you need to. Is you guys remember the article that came out in Arlington, the waters in Arlington about certain drugs that are in the water and however many parts per billion of each drug, like Xanax and other bug. Okay, that's not just Arlington. That's all over. And doctors come out and say, well, it's not going to hurt you because there's so small amount of parts per billion of this drug or these drugs, because there were several of them that were mentioned.
Right.
It's not about having a glass of water or one tomato or a Coke or a piece of bread. It's the cumulative effect and having it daily. And then you have stress of everything else. So you say, George, well, you know what, I should just give up. No, not really. That's the point of either cleansing or exercising or trying, like Craig's doing such a great job of, eating a different way. So if you're more conscious of it, you're doing the better of the bad. We really don't have a choice.